The sun, a tired ember in the vast bruised sky, was finally surrendering. It had spent the day beating down on the dust-choked plains, bleaching the last hope from what little green remained on Caleb Callio Thornwisher's land. He sat on his porch, the splintered wood creaking a familiar complaint beneath his weight. The air, thick with the scent of dying sagebrush and defeat, was still and heavy. Thorn's Creek, which had once been his father's pride, was now little more than a whisper of mud and cracked earth. The cattle, bony specters of what they once were, grazed on hope and dust. This wasn't a ranch anymore. It was a tomb waiting for its final resident. Cale had been born to this land, but it seemed the land had finally decided it was tired of him. He was a man of bone-deep exhaustion, his face etched with lines that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with worry. His hands, calloused and scarred, rested on his knees. They were hands made for honest work, for taming the wild, but now they felt useless. This unforgiving frontier had an iron law. The weak did not survive. And in the past year, Cal had come to know the taste of weakness. But as the first star pierced the violet expanse, a tremor ran through the silence. It wasn't a rumble of thunder. The storm had already passed, leaving behind a promise of nothing. It was a disturbance, a ripple in the stillness that screamed of something alien. Cale stood, his old rifle an unconscious extension of his arm. He squinted toward the North Ridge, a place where no one ever came. What he saw defied the simple logic of this brutal world. Two figures, barely visible against the twilight, were moving toward his ranch. They were not riders. They were on foot, and their immense size made them seem to float, to glide across the broken earth with a terrible, silent purpose. As they drew closer, their forms became distinct, and Cale's blood ran cold. They were Apache, and they were giants. Not just tall, but massive. One, a woman, was an impossibility of muscle and bone, her frame so powerful it seemed to distort the air around her. The other, her shorter companion, still towered over 6 feet. Their clothes were of fine beadwork, a sign of high standing, but they were torn and stained with blood. They moved like wounded animals, their pace a stumbling, desperate flight. Callio's mind, trained for survival, screamed at him to run, to bolt his doors, to prepare to kill or be killed. The Apache did not roam alone, and certainly not wounded. A full war party would not be far behind. The shorter one collapsed first, crumpling near his dying cattle. Her fall was silent, a testament to her training. The massive one stumbled, a deep, labored gasp escaping her lips. It was then that her eyes, dark and ancient, met his. There was no hatred in them, no fury, only a raw, desperate human fear that shattered every assumption he'd ever held about the Apache. The kind of fear he saw in his own eyes every morning when he looked in the mirror. She tried to speak, a wordless plea that whispered on the wind before she, too, fell into darkness. And in that moment, Cale Thorn made a choice that had nothing to do with logic or survival. He felt the weight of the land on his shoulders, a weight that had been crushing him for a year, but now he felt a different kind of burden. He knelt beside the two fallen giants, his trembling hands reaching for the wounded woman, and he knew that for the first time in a long time, he was not just a man waiting to die. He was a man with a choice to make. The night deepened, but sleep was a luxury Cale could not afford. The air in his small cabin, usually filled with the scent of old wood and loneliness, now held the distinct smell of blood and a strange, powerful, earthy fragrance. Like damp soil and sage, he had managed to get the two women inside, a task that required every ounce of his strength. The shorter one, whom the taller had called Kiona, was bleeding from a nasty gash in her ribs. The taller one, Naoma, had a deep cut on her forehead, but seemed more exhausted than mortally wounded. Even unconscious, their presence was overwhelming. The silent power they carried filled the small room, making Cale's own possessions seem like a child's toys. He had never been one for grand gestures, but something about their desperate eyes had stripped away the bitter laws of the frontier. He found himself tending to their wounds with a care he had once reserved for his prized steer, applying bandages and whispering reassurances into a language they couldn't understand. The entire time, Naoma's eyes, even half closed with pain, watched him with a wary, intelligent intensity. It was the look of a wolf who had been cornered but still had teeth to spare. Hours passed. The fire in the hearth crackled, a small rebellion against the cold night. Naoma's voice, a deep, resonant whisper, broke the silence. "Heal, sister." The word, simple and raw, hit Cale like a physical blow. It was the same word he had used 3 winters ago, the last time he saw his own sister before the fever took her. In that word, he saw not a ferocious warrior, but a sister desperate for her family. Suddenly, a different sound pierced the night. It wasn't the wind, nor was it the call of a coyote. It was the slow, deliberate thud of hooves on parched earth. Cale froze, his blood turning to ice. A war party. The sound was distinct, the horses moving with the quiet, deadly patience of hunters closing in on their prey. "They come," Naoma whispered, her body tensing despite her injuries. Her hand, massive and calloused, fell on the knife at her belt. Cale's mind raced. He had 12 rounds for his rifle, 6 for his pistol. Not enough. He peered through a crack in the shutters. On the northern ridge, 5 riders appeared, their forms silhouetted against the night sky. They were Apache, their faces streaked with war paint. Before Cale could panic, another sound joined the first, the sharp, methodical pace of a U.S. cavalry troop. "Damn it," Cale muttered under his breath. He was caught between 2 fires. Naoma's eyes followed his. "Not warriors," she said, her voice surprisingly clear. "Trackers. They come for us. And for you." The words made no sense. "Me? Why me?" Cale demanded. Naoma's gaze, sharp and knowing, settled on him. 3 moons ago, she began slowly, a girl was found near death by the river. White man brought her to our village, gave her medicine, food, never gave his name, never asked payment. Kalish's breath hitched. The girl. He remembered her. A girl no older than 14, half drowned and burning with fever. He had found her near the creek on his land, helped her back to health, and guided her toward Apache territory without a word. He'd never told anyone. It was just something he'd done. She was Chief Nakai's daughter, Naoma continued, her voice heavy with significance. The chief swore a blood debt to the unnamed white man who saved her life. But some warriors, they say no debt is owed to a settler. They come to test her story. Cale felt the weight of it all. The lives of the 2 women, the approaching cavalry, and now a blood debt he never knew he had. The Apache warriors in the cavalry patrol stopped their horses, forming a tense perimeter around his property. It was Colonel Hal Sterling, his uniform spotless, his face a mask of cold professionalism. Sterling was a by-the-book man who believed in the law of the government, not the customs of the wild. "Marsh!" Sterling's voice boomed. "We have reports of Apache hostiles in the area. We've come to search your property." "There are no hostiles here, Colonel," Cale lied, his hand on his pistol. He felt Naoma and Kiona tense behind the door. If Sterling found them, it was over. The cavalry would hang them all. "Don't lie to me, Marsh," Sterling said, his eyes narrowing. "There was blood on your porch, and footprints." He pointed to the dirt, where the immense footprints of the giant women were clearly visible. "Don't be a fool. Step aside." Cale knew he was out of options. He took a deep breath. "Wait," he said, his voice firming. "You're right. There are Apache women here. They were badly wounded. They came seeking help." Sterling's face twisted in disgust. "You admit to harboring hostiles? You'll hang for this, Marsh." "I admit to helping 2 dying human beings," Cale replied, the words a challenge. "The same as I would for anyone else." A shot rang out, not from Sterling, but from one of his men. It struck a wooden post beside the barn. "Marshal!" the man yelled. "Riders approaching from the north. A lot of them." Sterling's attention snapped away. The distinct rhythm of the Apache war party. He waved his men into defensive positions. "We'll deal with you later, Marsh," he snarled. But before Sterling could retreat, a lone rider emerged from the dust. It was Apache Nakai, his face painted for ceremony, his presence a calm, commanding force that made even the hardened cavalrymen hesitate. The true showdown had begun. The dawn came not with the soft light of a new day, but with the cold, unforgiving clarity of judgment. The air was thick with the scent of fear and the unspoken promise of violence. Cale Thorne stood in his doorway, the weight of the moment pressing on him. Behind him, Naoma and Kiona were solid as stone. Their presence was a living shield, a promise of a fight that would end only with death. Colonel Sterling, flanked by his men, was a picture of coiled tension. He had the law, the rifles, and the numbers. But facing him was an old man on a horse, Ith, L-N and H. Nakai, and 5 Apache elders, their faces painted with the symbols of peace and ceremony. They were not a war party, they were a tribunal. Colonel Sterling, Nakai's voice was a low rumble, carrying the weight of 1,000 years of history. You hold my daughters as prisoners. This creates a problem. Sterling stepped forward, his hand on his pistol. Your daughters murdered a settler at the Morrison place. They are wanted for questioning under federal law. The Morrison tried to force himself on my daughters, Nakai said, his voice hardening. They defended their honor. Apache law justifies their actions. The federal treaty recognizes Apache law in matters involving tribal members. The first volley in this war of words had been fired. Cale watched, mesmerized. It wasn't a battle of bullets, but of treaties and traditions. Nakai was a master of this game. Even if that's true, Sterling countered, harboring fugitives is a federal crime. This rancher broke the law helping them. Just then, a flash of movement. When one of Sterling's younger troopers, his hand trembling on his rifle, mistook a shadow for a threat. He aimed and fired, the shot tearing into the ground just inches from Cale's boots. The dust erupted, and a small, yelping dog, belonging to one of the elders, darted out from behind Nakai's horse, limping on a wounded leg. Silence. The air went still, a perfect vacuum of unspoken rage. Cale's heart hammered against his ribs. The trooper, horrified, dropped his rifle. Sterling's face was a mask of furious control. Nakai's gaze, as sharp as an arrowhead, settled on Cale. You are Caleb Thorne, he said, his voice devoid of emotion. 3 moons ago, you saved my youngest daughter from the creek. Yes, sir, Cale managed, his throat dry. For this, the chief announced, his voice carrying across the valley, Apache law says, I owe you a blood debt, a life for a life. Sterling's men stirred uneasily. They had all heard the whispered legends of blood debts. But you also saved 2 more of my daughters when they were dying. This makes the debt complicated. Naoma stepped forward, her immense height and undeniable presence. Chief, she said formally, this man risked everything to help us. He is worthy of Apache respect. Nakai nodded slowly. He reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a necklace of carved bone and silver. 3 lives saved creates an obligation beyond a simple blood debt, he announced. Caleb Thorne, you have proven yourself worthy of adoption into the Apache family. You become my son through deed and honor. A gasp rippled through the cavalry ranks. Sterling's face went pale. You can't do that, he spat. You can't just declare this American territory as Indian land. The federal government recognizes treaty rights, Nakai interrupted smoothly, and our treaty says we can adopt members and claim family lands. Your own law protects adopted Apache family members from persecution. The brilliance of the move was stunning. It solved every problem in a single stroke. Protection for his daughters, legal immunity for Cale, and a way to claim valuable land under federal law. Nakai turned to Cale, his eyes holding a mixture of amusement and challenge. Caleb Thorne, do you accept this adoption? Do you take my daughters as your sisters, my people as your people? Cale looked at Naoma and Kiona. Their faces, so often masks of fierce determination, held a new vulnerability. He saw not just the warrior giants, but the human beings who had trusted him with their lives. I accept, he said, the words ringing out with a conviction he hadn't known he possessed. Nakai stepped forward and placed the necklace around Cale's neck. The cold weight of the silver felt like both a chain and a liberation. Sterling, outmaneuvered and defeated, holstered his weapon. This isn't over, he seethed. There will be federal investigations. Let them come, Nakai said, his voice quiet and confident. My son and my daughters are under tribal protection now. But as he turned to leave, he looked back at Cale. "Son," he said softly, a new warmth in his eyes. "Tomorrow I return with a different decision. Tonight, think carefully about what adoption truly means." The longest night of Cale Thorne's life had passed. The necklace of the blood debt felt like an anchor around his neck, a tangible promise that had changed the course of his life. He stood in the cool morning air, his old self the struggling, desperate rancher feeling like a ghost. Months had passed since that night. Colonel Sterling had returned, but his inquiries were met with the unyielding logic of tribal law in a federal treaty. The government, eager to avoid a new conflict, had left the matter to lie. And so, Thorns Creek Ranch was no longer a tomb. It had been transformed into a bustling trading post, a bridge between two worlds. Under the protection of the Apache Nation, families came to trade goods, and the ranch, once a symbol of failure, was now a beacon of prosperity. Naoma and Kiona were the heart of this new life. Kiona, with her keen mind for business, handled the negotiations, her presence a silent, powerful guarantee of fair dealings. Naoma, a force of nature in human form, worked the land with a silent grace that awed Cale. She built fences, moved heavy logs, and worked with a quiet purpose that made his own work seem like child's play. But with prosperity came a new kind of struggle. Every day, Cale found himself watching Naoma, her effortless movements, the sharp intelligence in her dark eyes. The bond forged in fear had deepened into something else, something dangerous. The Apache law had made her his sister, and in the long, silent hours of the night, Cale felt the chains of that law tighten around his heart. "You struggle with adoption," Kiona had observed one evening, her voice soft but knowing. "Apache law protects family, but some protections become prisons." Now as Thath, Ilunch Nakai returned, Cale's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against his ribs. This was not the visit of a chief on a legal mission, but a father returning to solve a problem of the heart. Nakai dismounted, his gaze moving between Cale and Naoma, a knowing smile playing on his lips. "My son," the chief began, his voice carrying the wisdom of the wind, "you have honored this adoption, but I am an old man, and sometimes we solve one problem by creating another." He gestured to Naoma. "When I made you brother to my daughters, I solved a problem of law, but I created a problem of the heart." Naoma stepped forward, her great frame dwarfing Cale. He felt a sudden electric heat where her arm brushed against his. "Chief," she said, her voice clear and strong, "I choose to speak." "Speak then, my daughter," Nakai replied. "Brother has shown honor beyond any white man I have known." Naoma's words were a quiet testament. "His heart is true, his courage proven. But," she paused, her dark eyes locking onto Cale's, "my heart sees him not as brother, but as a man worthy of a different bond." A collective sigh of relief, of surprise, of 1,000 unspoken things rippled through the onlookers. The law had been bent, and now a new path was being forged. Nakai smiled, the same knowing expression that had once outwitted a federal marshal. "Then it is so," he said, his voice full of finality. "The bond of love will be stronger than the bond of blood. The spirit of the river will bless this union." But then he turned his gaze to Kiona. "As for my youngest daughter," he continued, "she has her own destiny to fulfill. She will go to the reservation school in Tucson to learn the white man's ways, to become a bridge between our worlds. The blood debt is paid, but the debt of wisdom is a new journey." Kiona's face showed a mix of surprise and quiet acceptance. This was her purpose, not to stay, but to lead. Cale felt a sudden pang of loss, a separation he hadn't prepared for. He had gained a life, but he would lose a part of the family he had just found. As the sun began its descent, painting the sky in strokes of gold and crimson, Cale looked at the land he had once thought of as a tomb. It was not a tomb, it was a cradle, a place where two worlds, once separated by law and hatred, were now joined by something far more powerful, a simple choice of compassion, a shared courage, and the fragile, beautiful promise of a life lived together. The dusty horizon was no longer a sign of an ending, but a new, vast frontier waiting for them to walk into it, hand in hand. A frontier built not just on love, but on sacrifice and the difficult, continuous act of understanding.